We'll start off with the interviewer, David Cummings, CEO of Atlanta Ventures, founder of the Atlanta Tech Village, and kind of everything what you see around here is because of David. Not really, kind of. It is. So let's give David a round of applause. And he is interviewing Josh Pigford. Josh is the CEO of Baremetrics. Baremetrics is a fantastic business that Josh has built in Alabama, Birmingham. And the thing I love about what Josh does is he's very transparent with his writing. He's very vulnerable, even on Twitter. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And Baremetrics, they bear their metrics as well. They provide revenue analytics and insights to businesses of all sizes. And 15 years in, he's still winging it. Fun factoid before we get started, he once built and ran the most popular social network for pug owners. So let's make sure we get into that too. Let's give Josh a round of applause. All right.
All right, Josh, my favorite opening question. How did you get started as an entrepreneur?
I would say I started when I was like 5 or something. I mean, like I'm probably the classic sort of kid who, you know, cuts grass and like makes signs and sets them up in the yard and like tries to make money. So I've been doing that since I was a kid, really. And
so it was just there?
I don't know.
It wasn't like mom or dad saying, hey, go make some money?
You know, like dad's an engineer, like had the same job for 30 years kind of guy. Like my mom plans weddings. Like no entrepreneurial bones in anybody's body related to me. So I don't know what, I think past being an entrepreneur, probably more than anything is I'm a maker. Like I want to make stuff. And sometimes like that veers more towards like I want to make money, but like it's also I enjoy building up something. And so, you know, making a thing and selling it, like it just sort of gets, you know, it makes me excited. So and that's always been the case.
So you went to school in Mississippi, live in Alabama now.
Yep.
What was that process? How did you arrive in Birmingham?
So I went to school in Mississippi, graduated, then my wife and I got married and moved out to Denver, actually. And then we ended up moving back to Birmingham when we had our first kid. So it's like all our family's down south, but you know, sort of geographically, it's all sort of indifferent for me. But you know, Birmingham's where we've been for the past 7-8 years.
So on your pinned tweet on Twitter, you have this amazing spreadsheet of dozens and dozens of businesses you've started.
Yep.
Some are projects, some are businesses.
Yep.
Some sold for $1,000 as their exit valuation.
For the Pug website.
For the Pug website. Yeah. Some sold for more money than that. It's really fascinating. Yeah. So check out Josh on Twitter. Go to his pinned tweet, and you'll see a Google sheet of all these companies he started.
50 plus. It's pathetic on some level. But.
So he started over 50 different companies.
Yeah.
Some of them on there are, shall we say, out there in terms of ideas.
Right.
And then some are more down the middle, SaaS type ideas. Take us through the most exotic or unusual one, and sort of what was the genesis of that? Yeah,
so so the very first thing that I ever started that I would, from an internet-based business, was I was teaching myself to program, and I wanted to build this is like early 2000s. So I wanted to have a way to like share all of the random things that I found on the internet. So that was reallydumbstuff.com was the first one, followed shortly thereafter by reallyfunarcade.com, right? So these are the kind of things that like I started with, right? But then it like, you know, over the course of 10 years, it was like there was this mix of me trying to start things, you know, but then a lot of it's just like me, like there was this one time frame where I got really obsessed with like Amazon affiliate stuff, or just affiliate marketing in general, which was not my bag, and I hated it. So I figured that out, that I didn't like doing that stuff. But then like slowly what you see through the spreadsheet from like starting back in the early 2000s to now is like I start figuring out what could be legitimate businesses. So, decided to like dabble in e-commerce. And so like my wife and I started a collectible, like a toy company, essentially. And we were like in our apartment with vinyl toys stacked to the ceiling, going to bed at night, like with like high on plastic fumes. And so, I start dabbling into that, and that leads into other things, like actually getting into more traditional sort of SaaS stuff. And to me, that's the most interesting part, is like watching this transition from like, the first thing legitimately was dumb. I mean, like that was the name of it, right? Like, so, and it just, I like to think it improved over time. You see the frequency decrease, and in theory, the quality increasing. I guess that's up for debate, but yeah.
So self-taught programmer,
Yes,
graphic design in college,
correct.
jack of all trades.
Yeah, and very much the master of none of it. Like I like being in that sort of generalist category. I think it serves me really well for starting things. I think it is a negative when it comes to like having to like stick with something for a long time, as is like shown by a spreadsheet of 50 plus projects over the past.
And so one of the strengths, if you check out the Baremetrics blog, is content marketing. Some amazing content. Tell us the backstory. How did you sort of come upon content marketing, and what were some of the lessons learned over time?
Yeah, so prior to Baremetrics, I had sort of a survey software company. You think of like SurveyMonkey, that kind of genre. So this was 2010, 11, somewhere around there. And I feel like content marketing had become a thing that people knew could work, but they hadn't figured out how to do it right. So there was lots of just pump out as much content as you can. So when I was doing the survey startup, I went that route of like, pay somebody 15, 20 bucks to pump out a 500-word article, call it a day. You've produced 1,000 articles, good for you. None of it does anything for you. And you've wasted your time, and then you kind of write off like, content marketing didn't work for us. So when I started Baremetrics, I decided like, and it's one other thing. I also, I ran a company, so it's called The Apple Blog, got acquired by a larger tech publication, but it was around just producing content. So like I was very comfortable with the process of producing content. So when Baremetrics got started, I had been building stuff for long enough where one, I knew that, so I had experience with content enough for me to know that it could work, but at the same time, I knew what not to do from like the previous company, where it's like, we can't do the like 500-word generic article thing that anybody could have written. So I also, at the same time, I decided to like specifically try to be helpful with the content, and not just from a teaching perspective, but like from a what's working and what's not working. Because I had spent the prior, almost decade just sort of like trying random things and hoping it would work, and a lot of stuff didn't, and I wish somebody would have told me things that could potentially not work or whatever. So that became the focus, was for me just to like write stuff that I was trying as we're growing the company.
So is there a certain tone or voice or style that you have in your writing that you think helps resonate with your audience?
Yeah, so for me, I was telling you back there, like writing on the blog is startup therapy for me. So it's like, it's a way for me, a lot of the stuff that I'm writing is not from a place of, hey, I've done a thing that works really well, here's how I did it, here's how you could do it. It's more of, I don't really know what I'm doing, but here's how I've been trying to work it out over the past, days, weeks, and months. And so that ends up resonating a lot with other founders who also don't know what they're doing, just like me, right? So it's a way to sort of, the tone is from a place of like, hey, we're all kind of winging it, so here's some things that have been working or have failed miserably. And so just like throwing it all out there is kind of the tone, I guess.
So tell us the origination story for Baremetrics.
Yep, so in 10, 11, 12, 13, I was running the survey company. And at the time, the whole concept of like SaaS metrics, so monthly recurring revenue, lifetime value, churn, like the metrics that a lot of times are very specifically associated with the sort of SaaS business model. Getting that stuff at the time was very difficult. You know, it was lots of either manually doing stuff in spreadsheets. You know, you might connect to some data warehouse kind of thing, but you have to, or some big sort of analytics product, and you're paying lots and lots of money to get that. And so at the same time, so there's a company called Stripe who does like payment processing stuff, was really starting to take off. We happened to be using Stripe, and so I started looking like, hey, can I just pull the data from Stripe, build my own analytics product? And it was initially just this internal tool. Like, I had no intention of doing anything with it. And then as I started building it and talking to some other founder friends, realized like, hey, there is a need for it because everybody's doing this thing in a spreadsheet that they hate and they never update, and it's sort of ripe for getting it wrong because there's a typo or something or whatever. And the less time you have to spend on a spreadsheet, the better. So so I decided to build this thing, just threw it out there, didn't really think anything of it. I mean, like, literally had built it internally and then decided to put it out there on a whim, threw a pricing page up with sort of arbitrarily picked pricing plans, and then it just sort of took off from there pretty quick. So that was 2013.
So is there a blog post or a content marketing piece that really kicked it off, or is it just slow and steady early on?
What kicked it off were two things. So about three or 4 months after I had launched it, it was just me. I did 100% of everything, design.
Solo entrepreneur.
Yes, and literally I had nobody else doing anything on it for the first.
You designed the website, you wrote the code, you built the product.
All the customer support, any kind of marketing or whatever. I was the only guy doing it. So I decided so I launched it in like October, I think, or November. And then that February, I was thinking like, okay, it would be really helpful to have a demo of this analytics product. So like what, I could fake all this data, or I could just make it public. Like I just make the whole dashboard public for everybody.
The dashboard of your own company's financial data,
here's
your own
what I'm
company's
making,
everything.
Here's how bad, say, churn is. Like here's all the people who canceled, whatever. So we anonymized the actual company names. I say I anonymized.
But you basically went to the world and said, I have a business.
Right.
It's making very little money. Lots of customers are leaving me. But this is reality. These are my actual real numbers.
Like here's how your business could look failing. So it started from a place of I say like laziness more than anything, but at the same time I guess there was this small altruistic component to it in that I've been doing this for many years, and there have been lots of people who have helped me and answered all these questions and been open with a lot of this kind of information just to help me. So here's a way that I can maybe remove a little bit of the facade of, hey, because you talk to anybody, how's it going? Like, how's the startup doing? How's your business doing? It's like, oh, we're killing it. Like, no, statistically, you're not. You're probably doing terrible. But here, we can talk about it now. Here's the central thing that can be this point for us to talk about. So that's where that started from. And when that happened, well, that sort of generates some buzz. And then from there, a couple of other companies said, hey, we want to make our numbers public too, amazingly. And then it just sort of took off from there. But
so roughly how many companies publish their metrics to the world?
So now there's probably, I think, close to 24 that have said, here's how our company's doing, good or bad, and you can see them and follow along.
So was there a point where it felt more like a side hustle and then it crossed some sort of chasm and you're like, hey, this is going to be the real deal? And what was that point?
So that point was when I could, so for me, I'm very pragmatic. And so when it got to the point where I could make a full-time salary off of it, it was like, okay, cool, we're good. We'll keep doing this and not the other things. And that was, but then and I did not ever expect for it to do much past maybe I could, initially it was like, hey, here's a side project. I've got the survey thing, that's fine. And I'll do this barometrics things for kicks. eventually, so I mentioned Stripe was who it was initially built on. Eventually, like they'll probably have their own thing, and then Baremetrics will go away. It'll be fine, whatever. But then it just kept growing, and so I decided, well, we'll just stick with this and see what happens, and stuck with it.
So it goes from side hustle to main hustle.
Yes. Yeah.
You're the solo entrepreneur. When
Right.
did you make that first hire?
When stuff started breaking and I couldn't fix it, like that was a good point to hire. So first hire was an engineer who I had met basically like at a networking event kind of thing, and we had happened to sit by each other at lunch at the networking thing, and I tweet too much, and I was tweeting essentially like this whole thing just melting down, the servers and all that stuff. And so he happened to message me and was like, "Hey man, you want some help?" Yeah. So so he helps, and then I end up hiring him. Worked for 3 years, I think. So he was the first hire, and I wish I had hired him a lot earlier, which is kind of the story of my life. But engineer was first hire.
So the business is over $1 million of recurring revenue. You can see it on the website as part of the Baremetrics. And so you've gone from being the side hustle to the main hustle to the first employee to 7 or 8 employees today.
Right.
Talk to us a little bit about where the employees are located and what the environment is like.
Yes, so we're a completely remote company. I happen to be in Birmingham, but nobody else is. We've got a few people in Europe, a few other people sprinkled around the US. Early on, it was sort of a conscious decision to hire remotely. Not because I had trouble like, I really want to hire from Birmingham and I just can't find anybody, but it was more of growing up as, a kid on the internet, like that the internet was a location for me as much as any sort of city was. So I was a kid in high school who was finding random people on the internet who we would build stuff to just some guy on a message board like, hey, you want to make this thing? Sure, why not? Whatever. And so that was a very easy that translates very easy for me where I think okay, I want to hire for some role. Who cares where they are? I'm perfectly capable and comfortable communicating with them over the internet because I've spent the past 10, 15, 20 years doing that. So whenever we have a job opening, it's post it, and I will happily talk to anybody from anywhere. And if we can make it work, then cool, it'll work. And so from the beginning, it was always, let's just hire the best that we can get, and regardless of their location.
And so how do you balance being a doer type, a maker type,
Right.
but now you got your CEO hat on, you got 8 employees.
Yeah.
What's that like?
Yeah, so it's not my favorite. I think there's an article on the blog about going from maker to manager. And I spend a lot of my time, so there's certain types of the management side that I do enjoy. So there's things like having one-on-ones with your team. I enjoy that because I enjoy the people that we've hired. I mean, they're just good people. It's fun having conversations about whatever. And I certainly want to make sure they're happy because, I'm grateful that they're even putting forth, or dedicating their current career towards Baremetrics. But past that, there's just lots of, just the organizational stuff, all of the things that kind of come with making sure you don't steer the ship into the ground, and so a lot of times I find myself missing the making part of things. So I a year ago hired an administrative assistant, and she's fantastic because she took a lot of that stuff off my plate. That which there's lots of different roles that can take a lot of stuff off your plate. But I wish I had done that earlier. I spent a lot of time trying to not have to do stuff, not from a laziness perspective, but from here are the things that I am not good at, and it's a bad use of my time to try to become really good at it, because there's certain things that I think all of us have. We have a certain skill set, or at least talents, or we tend to be better at certain things than others, and so trying to become amazing at something that's just not in your wheelhouse is a pretty bad use of your time. And so there's people who are a lot better at, say, design than I am. So I mean, I went to school for design, but I'm not a great designer. And so as soon as I could hire a designer, well, yeah, it makes sense to do that because I'm wasting my time trying to like make good design. So I think the more that you can sort of hire outside, get rid of the things that you don't want to do, like that's an okay thing. I think from a CEO perspective, you think like there are certain things that just come with the territory. Well, I mean, not necessarily. If you don't like doing something, then there's probably somebody who does like doing it, and you should hire them.
So having a SaaS product that provides metrics for other SaaS companies, I'm sure you've come across a number of SaaS entrepreneurs over the years. What are some of the common challenges that you see them make, and what advice might you give them?
So this is coming from a metrics company. This may not make sense, but I think most people pay too much attention to metrics, and I especially think early on you should just wholesale ignore them. I think we'll have companies sign up who are like, I'm not making any money yet. I'm like, well, what do you want me to tell? Like, the whole thing is around revenue, and you have zero of it. Like everything's going to be zeros. It's all bad. So, and they gain no benefit from. So you think of like churn, for instance, where it's basically the number of customers who are leaving in a given month, and somebody will be like, my churn rate's like 50%, which means they've just lost half their customers. And I'm like, how many customers do you have? Well, I've got 4. And we can't have a conversation here. That there's nothing to talk about because you don't have the data, right? So, and that exists in any sort of metrics world. So A/B testing, for instance. People love to A/B test stuff. And you just don't have, there's not enough at the top of the funnel for it to matter. And people love to get obsessed about numbers though because it's this very tangible thing that you feel like you can hold on to, and you feel like you can make decisions off of it because it's concrete, and you can understand it. Like it feels like it gives you an explanation for things, but most of the time it's very misleading unless you just have enough of it. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that people make early on is paying too much attention to numbers that are really irrelevant. And I think instead, there's early on this. You just need to go with your gut on a lot of things until there's enough data to back up some of that stuff. But
so there's lots of talk about being a data-driven entrepreneur and a data-driven CEO or executive or whatnot. But the reality is, in the startup phase, especially pre-product market fit, there's no good data to look at.
Exactly. There's just not enough of it. So. But again, people get obsessed about it and will really freak out. And there's not any reason to. Like, just go, I think it's important to have a goal or something to work towards. But early on, a lot of what you should be working towards, the only number you should be trying to increase is how much money you're making. It's like, until you're at X dollars in revenue, all the other things that come along with it don't matter. And you should just focus on, you think of it like you're in a hole and you're trying to dig yourself out. I mean, you need a bigger shovel. Whereas trying to figure out how to tweak user churn or lifetime value or whatever else is you've got this little garden trowel and you need a backhoe. And I think people get obsessed with the tiny things when they don't matter.
So once the company was able to pay yourself a salary, you felt like you're on the right path. Were there other milestones or other points of information that you're like, man, this Baremetrics thing's actually going to work. It's going to be a real business.
So I think, in hindsight, I would not look at it this way, but at the time I did. So shortly after, almost a year in, especially after we made our numbers public and things were going really well from a growth rate perspective, so you start getting all these investor calls and people wanting to put money into it. And I had no interest. So bootstrapped the whole thing, and then ended up I got approached with some really good terms. So ended up raising $800,000 at a $10 million valuation. And so from the economics of that, it's well, sure, it's a great terms. Why not? Whatever. I'm indifferent. That's essentially 8% of the company, sort of dumbing it down a little bit. But I didn't care to keep if I'd kept 100% or not. So fine, 8% of the company, I get $800,000, I can hire, and everybody's happy. We make billions of dollars. So that felt like a validator for me. Was looking at the bank account and there being a lot of money. But I think then I quickly figured out that that's not the case, and you spend the money that you're given. And so this is So I ended up spending all the money and almost ran out of it. And so like a reality check came real quick after we raised some money. But like I think a lot of times people look at and then we celebrate as an industry someone raising money, which is a little weird, but that's what people end up doing, right? And you talk about, hey, we got $20 million, or even if it's just like we got $50,000 or whatever. It's like, yay, congrats. But a lot of levels, it's I think it ends up making things worse mentally for a lot of people.
So the investors approached you.
Yes.
The investors gave you a term sheet that you accepted. So
Correct.
It must have been at or better than your desired expectations from an investment point of view.
Yeah.
Any other sort of terms or timelines? They say, hey, Josh, we're going to invest and we want to make XR dollars back in 5 years?
Yeah.
Any expectations?
So we had a very weird deal. So I mentioned Stripe, who's the payment processor. So they were trying to sort of kickstart this fund for people building stuff on their platform. So they were the ones who initially approached. They set the valuation, all that. I mean, I think we start to finish, I had to do no negotiating. They threw out the $10 million valuation. I said, yeah, that sounds great. Like, no, we're making like $10,000 right now. Who cares? Like, yeah, 10 million sounds great.
What was the approximate run rate at that time?
I mean, I think, it was probably $10,000 to $15,000.
Of ARR.
Oh, no, that was MRR.
MRR. So like 120
ARR,
grand?
100,000, but we'll say
100 grand. So they gave you a West Coast valuation even though you were in Alabama.
I'm in Alabama.
Yeah.
Right,
So they gave you a California valuation.
Yeah. So sounds good. Though in hindsight, so they started, I'm oversimplifying a little bit. They started with $500,000. I later had to raise an additional $300,000 because I spent the $500. And at that point, when I had to go and like add on, it was like a bridge round essentially, same terms, just sort of extended it a little bit. And I realized at that point that the valuation actually came back to kicked my butt because by the time we were in a not as great spot on the growth side of things, it became very difficult to try to raise an additional amount of money to just keep us from going out of business. And so it's like at a $10 million valuation, but you're now like your growth rate is no longer 30% month over month. It becomes a lot more difficult. And I didn't care about the valuation anyways. It's like I wished almost that I had taken a lower valuation if I had known that I was going to have to try to get some more money later on.
And so a lot of entrepreneurs glorify the fundraising process and celebrate it as a big milestone. And for you and your type of business, it was actually something that is more challenging and had more difficult.
I think the biggest lesson learned from that was what to use the money for. So I forget who it was. I think it was maybe like Justin Kahn from Twitch, who was saying like any money, doesn't matter how much money you raise, you will spend it all in 12 to 18 months. In which I found that to be the case. And so it doesn't matter if you raised 100,000 or 100 million. The thing is that like it burns a hole in your pocket, and you start thinking, well, of course, any problem can be solved by throwing money at it, and then your growth will match that somehow. I don't know where we get that idea from, but somehow that's the thinking is if we hire a ton of people, those people will somehow bring with them millions of dollars or something. I don't know,
but entrepreneurs are optimistic.
Right.
You see lots of shiny objects.
Sure.
You want to go chase the next growth trigger in the business.
And you keep doing that, and you keep thinking that if I fuel the fire with some more money on hiring, that's the way that you measure. I think a lot of times startups measure success by headcount versus say profit,
right?
Especially in the heavily VC funded world. And so you think, I mean, there are a lot of startups who will have hiring specific goals where like we need to hire 10 people a month, or we need by the end of the year we need to have hired 1,000 new people, and that works for big companies. But like when you're one or two people, you're not a big company, and you shouldn't operate and optimize the same way that they are, and so what I ended up, I think back to my biggest lesson was that I shouldn't have spent, or that spending money on hiring is really risky because it's a knob that you can't adjust very easily. It's not like a marketing spend where, okay, our burn rate's way too high. We need to lower our marketing spend. Well, no, you can't just stop paying people, right? And so it's very difficult to course correct when all of your expenses are tied up in headcount. So that was sort of a big mistake there. I'm not opposed to the money side. I like money. I think it's just what I spend it on. I think spending too fast on hiring.
So does Baremetrics scratch your maker itch, or do you have any side hustles going on right now that you'd like to share?
Yeah. So Baremetrics is my full-time thing, but I have to not stare at a computer. So I spend a decent amount of time doing, actually I make a lot of stuff out of concrete and wood. So that's very specifically an analog thing, project for me, intentionally, because I need to give my brain a break from focusing on Baremetrics. And I think a lot of times, especially founders, whether they're CEO or just co-founder in some other role, end up attaching their identity to their company, and so it's this emotional roller coaster if you do that, because the companies are up and down; they're not, just straight to the top. And so when you attach your own identity to that, it becomes an extremely stressful situation. And so when you can detach it and find enjoyment in other things and let your brain chew on other problems, that's really beneficial. So yeah, I've got a number of side projects just to give my brain a break from thinking about metrics.
So you meet an entrepreneur on the street. The entrepreneur says, "Hey, Josh, I want to be a SaaS entrepreneur."
Yes.
What piece of advice or two would you offer up to them?
So it depends on their skill set. I think the first is to have a skill set that involves really probably development more than anything. So the ability to have an idea, to make the idea on some level, and then see if there's anything there is extremely valuable. So what I see happen a lot of times is someone has an idea, no ability to execute on it, so they end up having to go, they'll contract out something to have somebody build something for them. They'll spend a lot of their savings on that. I mean, I've seen people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars of their own savings to have somebody build out a thing for them, all based on the singular idea that they believe will work, and in reality it didn't. It was a just flawed idea for whatever reason. And so then they find themselves out of a couple $100,000. When if they had spent a month or two learning some basic programming, they could have built something to prove if the idea had legs or not, and then found out it didn't and moved on to something else. And I think probably the biggest bit of advice is, your idea isn't really worth anything, and you'll have lots of ideas, and the sooner or the faster that you can figure out if an idea works or not. And this is from whether you're building, want to start a new company, or you have an idea for something within the company you're already running. Is the ability to prove an idea faster than having to wait for some development team to build something for you is extremely valuable long term. So even if you already have a company and you just have some ideas about what we could add on to the company or whatever, having some baseline sort of programming skills, I think, is immensely valuable.
So Baremetrics, over $1 million of recurring revenue, a handful of employees. What's the current challenge? What's your main next rock you want to move in the business?
Yeah, so I figured out I don't like sales and marketing at all. And I think part of that time is
So all that awesome stuff we heard from Brad just went in one side and out the other, and
yeah. So I mean, we have this backlog of I've written, I don't know, maybe a couple hundred articles that really actually do really well, and I don't want to do it anymore. So biggest challenge right now is figuring out. We've put all our eggs in the content marketing basket, and because that was just a natural outpouring of my ability that just happened to be there. So I talked earlier about how I think it's important to hire for the thing, like, instead of trying to get good at something that you just don't necessarily have the skill set for, you should hire it out. And that's the case for me with marketing. It's like I was good at the content side of things, but I'm not a good marketer. So I could spend months trying to become a good marketer, and I hate every second of it. Or I can just hire someone to spend their time and energy focusing on that, so that I can think more about like the product stuff, which is where I really enjoy. So biggest thing right now is finding somebody who does love the sales and marketing side of just like the growth side of building a company, and that's kind of where we're at right now.
So with the Baremetrics software, I'm sure you get to see metrics from a lot of other companies. Any company, without saying the company name, but industry, you're like, man, I can't believe they make so much money.
Yeah, so the affiliate marketers.
Yeah, there's some.
Man, those guys.
There's some pyramid schemes out there that just.
They're doing real good.
Wow.
So good. Lots, yes. So like some of our biggest customers, we're talking tens of millions of dollars a month.
A month.
Are in that industry. So
wow.
They're, I mean, extremely volatile.
Yeah.
You know.
But so Google could slash your rankings tomorrow,
and they will be out of business.
And they'll be out of business.
Absolutely.
But right now,
seen that happen multiple times.
They're ringing the cash register right now.
So I don't recommend going into that. It's very volatile.
Yeah.
And subscription box companies. So like
Loot Crate and those
kind of things, right? So those are huge. Their margins are minuscule. So from an actual profit perspective, they're not doing that great. But they make millions of dollars a month in revenue from subscription beard oil. I mean,
subscription beard oil.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Wow.
Right. So yeah, those are some interesting ones too. Yeah, which we've published. So talking about like how other companies are doing, we actually have a benchmarks thing where you can go. I think it's baremetrics.com/benchmarks. That sounds like it would be the thing. Something about just look for like open benchmarks, where you can see like how we've made the benchmarks of SaaS companies at different price points. Like, so if your average revenue per user is $100, here's what the MRR, lifetime value, churn, growth rates, all that stuff are for companies in that cohort. So you can kind of play the like, well, how do other people at similar stages as us, how are they doing? Like that kind of thing. So if you're interested in that.
Awesome. Yeah. Let's open it up for questions in the audience here. And so while the microphones are being retrieved, what's the one thing, if you could wave a magic wand and change about Baremetrics, what would you change about the business?
Our reliance on, sort of obscure thing, but a reliance on third-party data. So reliance on, so there's lots
Stripe
of
and Recurly and those
Stripe,
guys?
the data existing somewhere else, and us having to bring it in, it's a nightmare. So
constantly syncing data and
correct. That's really difficult.
API calls or streaming
API stuff and like staying on top of. Just people do really dumb stuff with their data. So we have to deal with that and all the infinite number of edge cases. So I would not have done it at all. I mean, like from the perspective of if I knew how difficult it was to actually do all that stuff, I wouldn't have started. Not that I don't regret it, but it's like if you know how hard something will be, it usually will convince you to not do it. And that certainly would have been the case here if I had known.
So being blissfully ignorant going into it
was a pro.
Was probably a good thing at the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Questions?
Hey, thank you so much for your presentation. Very valuable. My question is very quick. You mentioned that you're, looking for marketing, hiring and marketing. What are some things that you're looking for as far as like, if you were going to hire a marketing person to your company? Or what is a good reason why you wouldn't hire a marketing agency as well, or a contractor, third party, or something of that sort?
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Great question there, especially on the basically outsourcing it versus bringing it in-house. So I think we have dabbled in the outsourcing that stuff a little bit. Didn't love the results, and I think so much of it is that I think whenever there's a clear path to put $1 in, get $5 back. If you can find someone who can then like execute on that, so you think of paid like PPC stuff, or when you can do that and have somebody who just needs to execute on that, that can be a great thing to outsource. I think for us, we're in this transition phase where we've done a thing one way for a long time, and now we need to figure out what are the other ways we should be exploring things. It's much more cost efficient to have that in-house, where you've got a person who is a generalist, just like most people at our company are, who can try lots of things and isn't so focused on, well, we do this thing and we do a lot of that. Instead, it's somebody who can just explore and try a dozen different channels and figure out what we need to be doing next, and then can execute on that. And maybe you can then even outsource the execution of that after the fact. But I want somebody who knows the company and is able to really sort of dig in there and not feel this like, we're just paying money for an agency and nobody really knows what we're doing. We're gonna have somebody in-house for that.
Hey, I think you had said I think David said you're around $1 million ARR, a little over that, and you have 7 or 8 employees. Do you mind going through all the employees just in terms of kind of roles and org structure?
Sure. So we have 3 engineers, a designer, customer support. I have an administrative assistant. What am I missing here?
You're on the spot, on video, so your direct report is going to ask you why you forgot about them.
Me? I'm on there? Are you the only developer?
3 developers.
I have 3 developers. Yeah. I've mentioned the assistant. Holy moly.
We'll edit out this segment of the video.
Right.
Customer success, marketing.
No sales. I did fire somebody recently. Jeez. I think that's 7. Maybe it was 7.
That's 7.
Do you write any code yourself anymore?
No. Those privileges were removed.
You saw the light. They saw the light.
I mean, I kept breaking stuff. So many years ago, they said, no more, Josh. No more. Yeah.
All right, next question. Right here.
Great presentation. I really appreciate your honesty. You didn't have to. 2 quick questions. You mentioned earlier with regards to starting 50 businesses and in the early 2000s. Yeah. Could you just for a brief moment go into, like, to provide some context for some of the younger people, like what exactly were you certain of was going to be a fantastic idea, but then didn't turn out to be well, Every
one of them. Right.
And then a little bit to the second question has to do with capital allocation with the money and startups. It was a really astute observation. I have a couple of friends that have gone out to the Bay and they've done internships and stuff. And do you think it's like a substitution for not like more critical thinking? Because everyone says kind of like the same thing. They've observed that there's not a lot of fidelity. They're hiring people, but they're not completely sure. And I think they're hoping that they're going to get some of that from the new hires, or also like they get a lot of pushing from, I think, the VCs to
hire,
hit milestones. Yeah.
Well, that's absolutely the case. I mean, one of my early hires actually, so he'd worked remotely for us for years, and then had decided he missed working, having coworkers. His cat was not enough, so he decided to find and go work for a company. This is in Vancouver. And the company he went and worked for, he then ended up quitting a couple months later because he found himself always in meetings about hiring. Like, it was all they were doing was just hiring. They had not launched a product. They were just constantly talking about organizational structuring and like, here's how we do, HR stuff. And like everybody's just talking about hiring and growing these different teams within the company, but nobody's making anything. And that's not always the case. But I think as far as going to the Bay Area to work or whatever, I think the biggest benefit you'll find is just starting something yourself. And statistically fail it. I mean, you're going to fail at it. But I think too many people hate failing, or again, this kind of goes back to the programming thing I mentioned earlier, where it wasn't expensive for me to try all those ideas. It cost me nothing, except my time and then my ego, whether it was months later realizing it was the dumbest idea I've ever had. And I think you'll learn more than whether you go intern at a startup, whether you go get an MBA. You'll learn so much more in 3 months of trying to make something exist out of nothing than anything else, really. So.
Hi, you mentioned that. Come over here. You mentioned that you had a difficult time initially hiring people. Did you? I mean, can you give us an idea, sort of, how many people you initially talked to, what the level of frequency that you were talking to people, in trying to hire those early engineers, and how were you able to sort of make that, okay, I'm going to hire someone from Europe?
Right. So we don't necessarily have a hard time hiring. And early on, it was more of byproduct of me trying to do too much myself, like not thinking I needed someone. I think I think the hardest thing early on is especially when it comes to engineers, is you're competing with engineer salaries that you're thinking like San Francisco can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's insane, right? They're like, hey, I want a $300,000 salary, and you're like an entry-level engineer. No, thank you. So I think that's one of the massive benefits of the remote side. It's not when hiring remotely, I don't hire remotely so that I can pay somebody less. It's that it normalizes salaries to something that's, you think in the Bay Area, they're incredibly inflated over only because of supply and demand, right? Like there's just a massive demand. They can't hire fast enough, but we don't have to deal with that. So I hired people the engineer that I hired first, he was at the time traveling around the country on a bus with his family. Like, who cares I don't care where he is. He didn't care where he was. So I met him at a networking thing, yeah. So that's really been the case for almost any hire. It's that they have a specific sort of lifestyle, not in the lifestyle business perspective, but from they like where they live. Maybe they have a family and they don't want to move to a big city or anything, and they just like where they live. So sure, we'll hire there.
I've obviously read a good bit of your content and things like that. So when you create a bunch of content, you seem to dog food your content with your app, right? And how much in the product development life cycle, how much in the marketing life cycle has just dog fooding your own app benefited from those things, right? Like so using those as funnels for feature development, things like that.
How is the content marketing?
Well, no. How is the actual the actual data flowing through your app been able to generate those dog food funnels, and then actually generated new features out of those things from the feedback loops that other people give to you through that content?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's just sort of. I read all that stuff. A lot of our team reads the feedback that comes in from that stuff, and if it makes sense to put it into a feature, great. And I think, and then certainly we use the data that we see in our own product to create new things. I mean, so from a marketing perspective, like we had done this benchmarking thing where people were always asking, like, how am I doing? I mean, I was having those phone calls every week of somebody saying, like, I don't know how I'm doing. And of course, we've got our demo that's like showing one company's how they're doing. So then it was like, well, what if we offered some sort of benchmark thing? So then we make this open benchmark page that anybody can see. And then we eventually built that into the app itself so that anybody can compare their numbers to their sort of spot in the industry. And I think all that, it's very sort of organic of, let's try something. It may or may not work, but if it does, cool. If it doesn't, fine, whatever, that's fine too. Yep. Sure. Make their stuff public? Yeah, we've got dozens of companies that do it now. I mean, that was, you take companies who are already being transparent. So a company like Buffer is insanely transparent, right? They're making each individual salary public, right? Like that's about as transparent as it gets. And so we just, in that particular case, was perfect timing of, hey, you guys already make stuff public, let's facilitate that, and then we get lots of free marketing. So